Alex Pretti was a 37-year-old intensive care nurse, a man whose entire adult life revolved around keeping other people alive. His days were spent inside hospital rooms where time felt suspended, where beeping monitors and hushed voices marked the line between survival and loss. He worked long, punishing shifts at a Veterans Affairs hospital in Minneapolis, caring for critically ill patients who depended on him at their most fragile moments. These were men and women who had already given years of their lives to service, now relying on Alex's steady hands and calm voice to guide them through pain, fear, and uncertainty. Friends and coworkers say he had a presence that immediately put people at ease, the kind of empathy that cannot be taught, only lived. Outside the hospital, Alex was known as someone who truly lived. He loved the outdoors, climbing, hiking, traveling, and finding moments of peace far away from fluorescent lights and emergency alarms. He believed deeply in helping others, not as a slogan or a political stance, but as an action. Helping meant stepping forward when someone fell. Helping meant asking if someone was okay. Helping meant staying late, picking up extra shifts, listening when others needed to talk. That belief shaped every part of his life, and on the morning of January 24, 2026, it placed him directly in the path of a tragedy that has since shaken the country to its core. That morning, Minneapolis woke up under a cloud of tension. Federal immigration agents had been deployed across the city as part of a large-scale enforcement operation that had already drawn criticism nationwide. Residents awoke to reports of arrests happening in neighborhoods, on sidewalks, near homes and workplaces. Fear spread quickly, especially in communities that already felt targeted and vulnerable. In the Whittier neighborhood, people gathered as word spread that agents were detaining individuals in broad daylight. Some came out of concern, some came to document, some came simply to understand what was happening in their own city. The atmosphere was charged, emotional, and deeply uneasy. Phones were raised, voices were raised, people shouted questions, demanded explanations, and pleaded to know who was being taken and why. Parents held on to their children, neighbors clutched each other's arms. This was not chaos for chaos's sake, it was confusion colliding with authority, and fear colliding with authority. Alex Pretti was there, not as a protest organizer, not as a political agitator, but as a witness. Multiple people say he was filming on his phone, doing what millions of Americans do when something feels wrong, documenting it. Video from the scene shows him standing with his hands visible, phone raised, recording agents as they moved through the crowd. There is no sign of aggression, no attempt to interfere. At one point, officers shoved several people to the ground. Alex moved closer, apparently trying to help someone who had fallen. Witnesses say he asked if they were okay. That instinct, the same one that guided him in hospital rooms, guided him here. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but its impact will echo for years. Federal agents confronted Alex. He was pepper sprayed. His body reacted instantly, eyes burning, breathing compromised. He stumbled, he fell, and then shots rang out. Not one, not two, but a rapid, deafening burst. Witnesses describe the sound as shocking, overwhelming, and surreal, like time itself fractured in that moment. People screamed, phones dropped, some froze, unable to process what they were seeing. Within moments, Alex Pretti lay bleeding on a Minneapolis street. Emergency aid was delayed as officers secured the area. The same streets where neighbors walked their dogs and kids rode bikes became the site of a fatal shooting. Alex was pronounced dead at the scene. Almost immediately, two versions of the story emerged, and they could not be more different. Federal officials initially claimed that Alex was armed and posed a threat to officers, asserting that deadly force was necessary. That statement spread rapidly through official channels, echoed by headlines and talking points. But almost just as quickly, that narrative began to crack. Videos from multiple angles surfaced online, Eyewitnesses came forward. People who were standing only feet away spoke publicly, saying they never saw Alex point a weapon, never saw him make a threatening move, never heard a clear warning before shots were fired. They described a man holding a phone, not a gun, a man trying to help, not attack, a man who looked confused, disoriented, and frightened, not confrontational. As the footage spread, public outrage erupted. Within hours, Alex's name was everywhere. Social media platforms flooded with posts demanding answers. By nightfall, vigils formed across Minneapolis. Candles flickered on sidewalks as strangers stood shoulder to shoulder in silence. Handwritten signs appeared reading "Justice for Alex" and "Nurses save lives, they don't threaten them." People cried openly. Some hugged people they had never met. Over and over, one phrase was repeated: "This didn't make sense." Alex's family was suddenly thrust into a nightmare no family is ever prepared for. Her sister spoke publicly, her voice shaking with grief and fury, as she rejected what she called lies about her brother. She described Alex as someone who ran towards emergencies, not away from them, someone whose entire career was built on de-escalation, compassion, and care. His parents echoed her words, saying they could not reconcile the man they raised with the version being portrayed by authorities. They asked the public to remember who Alex really was, not a headline, not a talking point, but a son, a brother, a caregiver. His co-workers were devastated. Doctors and nurses from the hospital described Alex as exceptional, skilled, steady, deeply human. Veterans who had been under his care shared stories of how he talked them through fear in the middle of the night, how he stayed late even when his shift was over, how he treated patients like family. For many, the idea that this man could be labeled a threat felt not only wrong but cruel. As public pressure mounted, city and state leaders demanded answers. Minnesota officers called for an independent investigation. Questions poured in from every direction. Why were federal agents operating with such force in residential neighborhoods? Why were officers wearing masks and lacking clear identification? Why was lethal force used so quickly? And why did official statements appear so disconnected from what video evidence showed? Protests intensified, streets filled with marchers calling for accountability. Some demonstrations were peaceful, marked by silence and candles. Others turned tense as riot gear, flashbangs, and tear gas appeared once again, images that have become disturbingly familiar in modern America. To many, Alex Pretti's death felt like a tipping point, a moment when fear, authority, and unchecked power collided with irreversible consequences. National media seized on it. Cable news panels debated it endlessly. Commentators argued about federal authority, gun rights, immigration enforcement, and protest culture. Talking heads shouted past each other. But cutting through the noise were the late-night tributes, moments that stripped away the politics and focused on the human cost. Late-night hosts dedicated entire segments to Alex's life and death. They spoke not as comedians, but as citizens grappling with a grim reality. They read his story aloud. They showed his photo. They asked the questions many viewers were thinking but struggling to articulate. How does a nurse end up dead during a federal operation? How does helping someone become fatal? The studio audiences were silent. Laughter was replaced by disbelief, sadness, and anger. Public figures who rarely speak on political issues broke their silence. Actors, musicians, and television personalities posted messages demanding justice. Nurses' unions released statements mourning the loss of one of their own. Veterans groups expressed outrage that someone who spent his life caring for former service members could be killed without clear justification. At the federal level, pressure intensified. Lawmakers demanded briefings. Congressional committees requested documents. Calls grew louder for body camera footage, radio transmissions, and full transparency. Some politicians urged patience, asking the public to wait for investigations. Others responded bluntly, saying patience had already cost a man's life. As days passed, more details emerged, and each one deepened the controversy. Reports suggested that protocols may not have been followed. Questions arose about command decisions, rules of engagement, and whether the operation itself had been recklessly planned. The lack of immediate clarity fueled suspicion and anger, widening the gap between official explanations and public trust. Meanwhile, the legal battle began to take shape. Attorneys representing Alex's family prepared for what could become a landmark case. Civil rights organizations stepped forward, offering support and demanding oversight. The phrase "justice for Alex Pretti" became a rallying cry, not just for immigration activists, but for anyone concerned about accountability, transparency, and the use of force. For many Americans, this was no longer just about one incident. It felt like part of a pattern, a sense that lethal force is being used faster, explanations are coming later, and accountability feels increasingly distant. Alex's death became symbolic, not because his life mattered more than others, but because his story was so painfully relatable. A nurse, a helper, a man filming with his phone, someone who could have been anyone's brother, coworker, neighbor, or friend. Even as investigations continue, one truth is already clear. Alex Pretti's life and death have left a permanent mark on the national conversation. His name is now tied to questions that refuse to go away. Questions about power, responsibility, and what happens when those entrusted with authority make irreversible decisions. In Minneapolis, memorials remain. Flowers wilt and are replaced. Candles burn down and are relit. People stop, read his name, and stand quietly. Some whisper prayers. Others just stare, trying to understand how a single moment can change everything. Alex Pretti is remembered not for how he died, but for how he lived, helping, caring, showing up. And as the country waits for answers, his story continues to resonate, reminding us that behind every headline is a human being, and behind every statistic is a life that mattered. Make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more celebrity updates just like this.